Good morning, everyone. And I guess we haven't. Oh, there we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning on my regular DC updates. I wore my special red, white, and blue outfit for you guys today. I've got three topics I want to cover at the top of this, and then we'll get to all of your questions as quickly as possible. First of all, the thing that I'm still spending the majority of my time on as chairman of the Intelligence Committee is the war in Ukraine. I think we've all been outraged by the horrific images we've seen from these Ukrainian towns after the Russians have been pushed back. The horrible killings, I believe they are war crimes, and I believe Putin and those responsible need to be held accountable. I think it's extraordinarily important that the United States and our allies continue to send the Ukrainians the arms they need. We are literally over 50,000 anti-tank missiles and tools that have been sent to the Ukrainians, us and our NATO allies. And obviously by the number of burned out Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers, they are being extraordinarily effective. We're also getting advanced ground-to-air missiles to the Ukrainians' hands. We're continuing to send literally millions of rounds of ammunition. And as we've seen, if we give the Ukrainians the tools they need, they're able to hold off the Russians. On the other hand, we're entering into what appears to be the second phase of this war, where the Russians may be redeploying their troops to the eastern part of Ukraine, the so-called Donbass region. And I think it's really important that we, again, continue to make sure the Ukrainians get the tools they need to wage a successful repelling of these Russian forces. To do that, we also need to continue to increase sanctions. Yesterday, the administration announced new financial sanctions. We need to, hopefully, the foreign ministers meeting and NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels will increase those sanctions. One of the things I'd like to see are the Germans and others cut off Russian oil and gas. One of the things the administration should have talked more about is the fact that they've actually issued additional permits to build export facilities for liquefied natural gas, LNG, so that we can send some American gas over to our European allies so they can get off Russian oil and gas. I wish the administration would have made more news on that. And it's critically important that we do our part to help, again, support our Russian allies, our NATO allies, as they get off of the Russian energy sources. So more to come on Ukraine, and I would continue to make the point that while the Russian military has been totally inept, the one thing I know as chair of the Intel Committee is that the Russian cyber forces are still quite good. We still don't have a great answer of why they have not launched more massive cyber attacks in Ukraine or against Europe or against us. But American companies need to still be on guard, because I think we could expect, and I would frankly not be surprised at all if we see Russian-based cyber attacks against us in the coming days or weeks. Secondly, today at about 1:45. We're going to vote. The Senate will historically vote for the confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to be a member of the Supreme Court. I look forward to voting for Judge Jackson. She has got the intellect, she's got the experience, she's got the judicial temperament, I think, to be a great judge. I'm not sure I could have sat through that kind of grilling, unfair grilling she got from some of the Republican senators, and maintain my cool the way she did. So I look forward to voting for her. I'm very proud of my Republican friends who are voting for her, so she's going to get a strong bipartisan vote, and that will happen later today. Last item I want to raise at the outset is something I've talked to you guys about, it feels like weeks on end, and that is the need for us to come to a final conclusion between the House and the Senate on the innovation bill, or what I call the CHIPS bill. this legislation, which I was proud to be on the CHIPS portion, the original sponsor, $52 billion for investments in building semiconductor factories here in America, for additional research, for how we move in the wireless sector beyond 5G to the systems called Open Radio Access Network, ORAN. This is extraordinarily important in terms of national security. We want to make sure semiconductors, which are in any kind of device that has an on-off switch, are made here in the country. Jobs, building these factories and facilities, they're called fabrications, fabs, will create literally tens of thousands of jobs, and also help deal over the longer haul with inflation, because one of the biggest drivers of inflation right now, particularly in the auto industry, is the lack of semiconductor chips. So I hope to be on that conference and be working on this as Congress goes into a 2-week break. But one of the things that was significant yesterday, I and Congresswoman Spanberger led a letter of every member of the Virginia delegation, Democrat and Republican alike, saying Virginia ought to be a place that receives one of these semiconductor facilities. We've already got one in Northern Virginia with the Micron company, but there are a series of both American, European, and frankly Taiwanese companies that are looking at additional investments in America. And I want to lead our effort, working with the governor and others, to make sure we get one of those fab plants, fabrication facilities here in the Commonwealth. So with that, Laura, why don't I turn it over to you, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Our first question today will be with Hannah Brandt with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator Warner. Thanks again for doing this. Wanted to ask you about President Biden putting student loan payments on pause. Is that enough? Is that a good idea? Should he be doing more in terms of canceling student loans altogether?
Well, Hannah, I think extending the student loan deferral of payments while we're still in this challenging kind of post-COVID time makes some sense. That's not going to be a long-term solution, and frankly, I would be concerned about an overall cancellation of all student debt, although I know that would be quite popular. Just on some level of fairness component. But canceling a portion of the student debt, which the president has suggested, $10,000 per student loan, I think would be an idea I'd be favorably inclined to look at. But what I would like to do, and what I have been pushing the administration is, and we've missed a little bit of this window already by not doing it earlier, which is way too many people are paying student debt at 6, 7, 8, 9%. Those interest rates are way above where the Fed interest rates are. I think we ought to refinance all student debt to below 3%. Those were market rates as recently as 120 days ago. If you can bring that student debt interest rates down to below 3%, close to the Fed rates, that takes a lot of the burden off of the repayment, but it still makes sure that people's obligations are fulfilled. So that's the approach that I favor the most. It gives relief, but it does it in a way that I think is more reasonable, and my hope is we can see that happen. Now and it could still include a partial cancellation and then the refinancing offer, and that would be something I'd be favorably inclined to support as well.
Our next question will be with Mike Gooding, 13 News Now.
Helps if I unmute. Thanks. Good morning, Senator. Thanks for doing this. I wanted to ask you about the DOD's FY23 budget proposal that would retire 24 ships. It would add 9, but that would be a net sum loss of 15 ships and get rid of 10,000 sailors within 5 years. Just wondering if that sounds like a smart idea to you.
Well, Mike, let's remember, this is a proposal. And as we've seen, not only with Biden's budgets, but with Trump's budgets, Obama's budgets, rarely does Congress fully implement the president's proposed budget. I'd like to see their explanation. I do believe we've got to keep our Navy strong, and I'm strongly in favor of the new ship construction. I'm strongly in favor the great work we do in Hampton Roads and at the shipyards. But I'm also realistic enough to know that as we think about increased needs in cybersecurity, as you think about increased needs in our satellites and overhead capacity, as we think about upgrading both in terms of the kind of work and construction that's being done on carriers and new subs, that at some point, there is an appropriate time for retirement of some of our older parts of our fleet. So far, the Navy has not made that case to me in a strong enough way, but I'm going to let the administration try to make their case, and then I will study it and give you a fuller and more complete answer.
Our next question will be with Mitchell Miller, WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot again for doing this. A couple of questions related to Ukraine. One, as you know, the Senate is now voting on the new trade restrictions on Russia and Belarus. Your thoughts on that and the effectiveness of the sanctions? And then secondly, more broadly, are you encouraged by what's been called a new approach to intelligence sharing related to Russia to try to counter its various bogus claims, both at the outset of the war, but also most recently that Ukrainians somehow staged the deaths of people when drones and other technologies have clearly shown that people were killed in Russian-occupied areas?
Mitchell, thanks for both those questions. I do think the reversal of the trade status with both Russia and Belarus is a smart thing to do. And that's going to pass overwhelmingly in the Senate as it has already overwhelmingly passed in the House. The truth is, though, we do very little trade. The United States does only about $26 billion of trade with Russia on an annual basis. The vast majority of the trade done with Russia is done with our European partners. So we need to do more, but we also need to work with our European partners so they can do more. And that's why I so strongly support, for example, our ability to continue to take advantage of American gas, both for domestic consumption, but also liquefy that natural gas and get it over to the Europeans, the Germans in particular, so they can get off the Russian oil and gas. I think our sanctions so far have been moderately effective. They will take some additional time. I have been a little disappointed that the value of the ruble went way down and the Russians were able to basically shore it up a little bit. I think these additional sanctions that were announced yesterday on, for example, Sberbank, one of the largest banks in Russia, will do more to ratchet down that ability for the Russian central bank to kind of prop up its currency. But I think you'll see a 15 to 20% decline in the Russian economy over the coming months. But we knew these sanctions economically were not going to be like an on-off switch. They will take some time to phase in. They're going to be a heck of a lot more effective if we can do it in concert with our allies. And that's one of the, many things the administration may or may not have gotten fully right, but making sure that NATO is strong, making sure that we act with our European allies, but also with countries like Japan and South Korea and Australia, other allies around the world, to ratchet up the pressure on Russia. They've done that because they've worked in a multilateral basis, and that has been much more effective than America acting alone. On the second question, I really think the American intelligence community has done an A-plus job on the circumstances in terms of predicting what Putin was about to do in Ukraine and being willing to share that intelligence in almost real time with both the public and with our allies. I can assure you, in detail I can't get into on this show, that by forward leaning of saying, okay, Russia's going to try to attempt a coup in Ukraine, and then the British intelligence saying, and this is the guy they're going to put in, or the United States and our intelligence services showing that it was Russia creating these brutal murders and there was no ability for Putin to claim a false flag operation that somehow it was Ukrainians. Time and again, even the intelligence community saying that Putin may not be getting all of the right intelligence from his own military leaders. I know it's caught him off guard, and it has got him totally spun up. I think that's been extraordinarily effective. Our willingness to share intelligence with our European allies has kept that unity of purpose and the willingness of our intelligence community, frankly, to share intelligence with the Ukrainians, who frankly have been extraordinarily effective at taking out Russian columns, taking out Russian assets in a way that I don't think any of us could have predicted. They wouldn't be able to do that without that intelligence sharing from us and other NATO allies. So, it's way too early to spike the ball, and there'll be some great, I think, commentary afterwards about who in the intelligence community push this policy change. I'm not even asked yet. I want to make sure this continues to proceed. But I think this change of being willing to share intelligence in a more real-time way, I hope it's a policy that will continue.
Our next question will
Thank you
be
very
with
much.
Kelsey Childress. Kelsey?
Hi, Senator Warner. Thanks for doing this. So recently, the Hunter Biden laptop scandal investigation has come back to light and kind of gained some steam. What do you think should be happening with the investigation now?
Well, I've followed some of this in the press. I know it is being reviewed, I believe, by the Justice Department, I think the U.S. Attorney, and that process ought to continue. And just as we've seen, I know there are people frustrated that the Hunter Biden case has not moved quicker. I know there are people that are frustrated that the Justice Department hasn't moved quicker on some of the referrals that have been made by the January 6th committee. The one thing that I hope most Americans now believe is that the Justice Department is going to follow the law and pursue all of these cases in a non-biased, appropriate way. That was clearly not the case, unfortunately, when the Justice Department was so politicized under the former president.
Our next question will be with Daniel Grimes from WDBJ.
Good morning, Senator. So you just described the sanctions the Biden administration has levied on Russia as moderately effective. I would be curious if you would support, any more sanctions or troops on the ground or just anything else to really hone the message to Putin that he should stop this war.
I am not in support of placing American or NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. I am in support of additional military assistance to Ukraine in ways that can be fully utilized. And I think the Ukrainians, while they're still and understandably asking on a daily basis for more tools, I know, for example, the so-called S-300s, some of the ground-to-air advanced missiles, those are in transit finally. We have to ship Soviet systems because those are the systems the Ukrainians have been trained on. They are finally in transit. That's been a complicated process to go through, where a country has to give up those missile defenses, and then they have to be backfilled by our Patriot systems. That is finally happening almost real time. So that's important. I think, in many ways, the ability for these economic sanctions to really ratchet down much more dramatically has to come from the Europeans and other nations around the world who do much more trade. That's why I've been so supportive of our export of LNG, natural gas from America, increasing our American gas production, for both domestic use and for export, so that we give the Europeans an alternative source to get them off Russian oil and gas. I also have to say I continue to be a little discouraged, though, by some of our longtime allies like India and Israel and Saudi Arabia, who so far have been on the sidelines, and in some cases, it's been reported, for example, that India may be, frankly, buying additional Russian energy assets. That concerns me. This is in my mind, not any way morally close. We, the Ukrainians, are on the moral right side. The Russians are perpetrating war crimes. They have invaded an independent democratic nation. And if a major country can't choose a side in this clear-cut a case, then I really wonder and question about their commitment to democratic values. I'm also very concerned about China's continued engagement and involvement with Russia. I think China has been watching this war play out as President Xi in China has his own aspirations towards Taiwan. That could be another kind of enormous conflict between an authoritarian nation and a democratic society. And I believe in this country we need to continue because long term the economic challenge of our time will be with China. And my beef is always with the Communist Party of China. It's not with the Chinese people or the Chinese diaspora or Chinese Americans. But we know China from an economic challenge is unlike anything we've ever seen. Soviet Union, Russia, they are a military threat. They used to be an ideological threat, but they have never been an economic threat. China, with its investments in technology, one of the reasons why we've got to get this CHIPS bill done and make those semiconductors here in America is because if not, they'll be made in China. And as we see right now, real time when you come to conflict, if you don't have a domestic supply chain on whether it be semiconductors or we saw during COVID on PPE and other tools, the source for our drugs, too oftentimes the so-called API is made in China. One of the reasons why we've got this incredible facility in Petersburg, Virginia, combined with some of the things in the biopark in Richmond, that could literally create a drug supply chain here in America. We've got to, I know I'm going on a little long, but this longer-term challenge with China is, while we focus on Russia, cannot be taken out of the equation.
We have time for two more questions. Next will be Joe Thomas with WCHV. Joe? Okay, we're going to be moving on to Michael Martz.
Yes, good morning, Senator. I saw the letter that you and Congresswoman Spanberger and the other remainder of the rest of the Virginia delegation sent to Secretary Raimondo about the CHIPS Act. Specifically, that letter talks about pitching the Virginia sites for the National Semiconductor Technology Center and the National Advanced Packaging Manufacturing Program. Could you talk a little bit about that, and as well as the status of the conference committee on the final legislation?
Well, Michael, let me start with the second part of your question and then move through this. The conference committee has still not been formally named. I hope it'll be named in the next day or so. For most Americans who kind of remember their civics, a bill passes in the House or the Senate, they may be different versions, and then you put a group of senators or House members together and they so-called conference it. We haven't done that in like 10 years. And this process of getting to a conference committee has taken way, way too long. And frankly, there have been some Republican members in the Senate who've slowed down this process at every step, even though this is broadly bipartisan. And there are a couple Democrats opposing as well. But even though this is broadly bipartisan, it has taken too long. I hope we will get started work on this literally as the Congress goes into recess. This is one of my top priorities to get done as soon as possible. Critically important for national security, critically important for jobs, critically important for inflation, and I believe critically important for Virginia. Now, of the $52 billion, what are the opportunities for Virginia to come out of this? The National Semiconductor kind of research component will be a center that will be located somewhere in our country for research. We have a huge amount of world-class universities and other research facilities already in Virginia where this could be co-located, or we could create a new center, and Virginia would be a great, great location. Secondly, there's the so-called national packaging. What does packaging mean? Well, once you make the semiconductor, make the little chip, how it gets put together is the so-called packaging component. That's another center that, again, with whether it's Tech or UVA or VCU or ODU, we've got huge expertise and component. We think that could be located. The third is the idea of there will be increased requirements for the so-called equipment manufacturers. We think about the semiconductor fabrication facilities, the big factories like the way Intel announced in Ohio, but one of the most important components of those factories are the very sophisticated equipment that actually produces the semiconductors. There's money in this for increased research in that area. Right now, there are 2 American companies, 1 Dutch company, 1 Japanese company that basically controls that market. We've got to make sure we continue to control that market, and there could be a manufacturing facility as well that Virginia could go after. And then finally, the focus where most people have been, there's going to be 10 to 12 semiconductor factories, fabrication facilities that will be located in America out of this legislation. I believe that Virginia should be very competitive for one of those facilities. These facilities will sometimes take over 1,000 acres. So we've got to make sure, and I'm working with the VEDP to make sure that we've got sites that are ready to go. So as these companies make these decisions over the coming months and years, some of this will spend out over literally 3 to 5 years, that we can be competitive. This is an area where we've had a history, as you know, Michael. We have a facility in Northern Virginia. We had a facility that under Governor Allen was announced back in the 90s, and when I was governor, we upgraded it. It was up in Henrico, but the semiconductor industry goes up and down, and that facility unfortunately fell a little bit behind. It shuttered. There could be a possibility of that could be reopened, or there's a variety of other sites around the Commonwealth where we can be very competitive. Sorry again for going on so long, but this is a really, really important item. Last point I also want to make that I'm not sure the letter fully made is that we focus on the semiconductor component. With this bill, which we keep changing its name, the so-called Competes Act, there are also going to be a series of tech hubs. And some of those tech hubs need to be in rural communities. And I know we've got very active efforts in both Southside and Southwest to seeing if one of those tech hubs we can't be competitive with as well.
We're going to try Joe Thomas one more time. Joe? All right, if not, that was all the questions we have.
All right, well, thanks very much. I guess, Joe always gets me with a zinger, so I know he'll probably save that for the next one of these sessions. But thank you all very much. And again, closing out with both incredibly important time. So proud of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership. I think, though, we should take pride in the fact that we have been supplying them with the tools they need. I'm proud today that Judge Jackson is going to be confirmed on the Supreme Court. And as I mentioned at the outset, I'm very passionate about getting this semiconductor and technology research deal done and making sure Virginia is going to be a winner out of that legislation. Thanks so much, everybody.